Okay, I think we're going to make a start now. Um, More of you will be trickling in over the next few minutes, and that's fine. I'm sure you can catch up. Just wanted to say thank you for giving up your lunchtime or whatever time it is for you to come to this webinar. Really great to have you here. Just to make sure you're in the right place and coming to the right webinar, this one is about the professional development framework. It is the third of a series of four. The first one, in case you didn't get to see it, was about an overview in the background for the professional development framework. And the second one, we did a deep dive into the core competencies. But don't worry, you can see these are being recorded. So these will all be available on the RCSLT website, and also you can link to them from the YouTube channel. So again, we'll be recording this one. So we'll have a full set. The last webinar is in May. And this will be the fourth and final in the series, and that will be on career planning and thinking differently about how you plan your career. But this is the third one, and today we will be looking at a deeper dive into the 4 domains of practice. So I hope you've come to the right place, and that's what you were expecting. Okay, so thank you, Justinia. Justinia is behind the scenes, moving things along and making sure everything's okay. So she'll help you with any technical queries. If you want to get in touch with Justinia, just use the chat button, which is the 2 speech bubble icons. So use that for any kind of queries. And of course, if you want to chat with each other and share some messages, and we've already had a lovely good morning from Tabitha, so thank you for that. Also, we have a Q&A button, which I think is a single question, single speech bubble. So please do send in questions to the speakers using that. Please send them in at any time, but we'll be looking at those at the end. We'll have a dedicated space to look at those questions. I should also say as well that we are taking all of those questions and compiling them into an FAQs document, which we are putting up on the website every time we finish one of these webinars. So by the end, we'll have a really rich document answering all the kind of questions that you need answering. And if we don't get through all of the questions today, because these kind of events do generate a lot of exciting questions, if we don't get through all of them, rest assured we will deal with it in the FAQs. So you won't miss out. Just look out for that FAQs document. And just to say as well that we have a hashtag for this event, which is hashtag RCSLTProfDev. And I see that Justinia has already put that up in the chat as well, if you didn't catch that. And I'd like, if we can go on to the next slide, please. Yes, so today the focus will be on the professional development 4 domains of practice. We will see a live demonstration of the interactive version of this, and we will think about how you can use the framework for different career stages. We will also look at some of the resources that support it, and on hand we do have my colleague Jessica Lane, who is the Research and Outcomes Officer, who will be able to help you with any questions that go more towards the slant of the evidence research and innovation type of domains of practice. So she'll be very much able to point you in the direction of some useful tools there and be on hand to answer any questions. And speaking today, we have my colleagues, Mark Singleton, Learning and Development Manager for the RCSLT, followed by Will Christopher, who is the Project Manager for Post-Registration Education and Learning. And we're delighted to welcome as well one of our members, Kirsty McLachlan, who is just I always knew I was going to stumble in an audience of mostly SLTs, a strategic lead for advancing practice in NHS Lothian. And she'll be talking more about how she's using the framework and how it aligns to advanced practice in her journey. And then you'll have a chance to ask us any questions. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Mark.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vicky. And first of all, welcome to everyone. Like Vicky's already said, thank you so much for coming along during lunch break or some form of break, again, whatever time it is for you. And yeah, I think let's get going, shall we? So first of all, a reminder for everyone where the framework is and how you can access it. I will I will be live demoing how to get to it and showing you how the interactive version of the framework works. But yes, if you want to follow along live, as it were, you can scan that QR code with a mobile phone camera and that will take you to the page. Or if you go to the RCSLT website, it's one of the options in the learning menu. But that's just, like I said, just a reminder of where the framework is. And if I could have the next slide, please, Hannah, thank you. So, like Vicky said, the focus of this this webinar is the 4 domains of practice. So those are the 4 quarters of the circle that sit on the outside, and they are professional practice, facilitation of learning, evidence research and innovation, and leadership and management. They kind of broadly align to the 4 pillars of practice, but they use language that you as members asked for when we were developing the framework. So a big part of the development process for us was involving members, actively involving you, getting feedback, getting thoughts, questions, queries, all of the comments. And so we've tried to, as far as possible, make it something that makes sense to SLTs. It is a profession-specific framework. And if I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So each of the 4 domains is essentially made up of a few sub-themes. And then each sub-theme has a set of detailed topic questions. And then as an aside, the 5 core components, which are kind of the middle ones, so impact, sustainability, those arrow ones, they've been woven into the question sets and the domains. So that in essence, the question sets, we see them as being used as kind of more of a self-assessment type thing. So whether you use the interactive version of the framework or the PDF version, you can kind of self-assess against as many of the question sets as you'd like, to help you identify, for example, areas for development, if that's what you kind of want to use it for, or to help you start thinking about what skills you might want to start working towards if you're thinking about a career change, something like that. There's absolutely no expectation when you're using the framework that you'll do all of it in one sitting. You can focus in on specific, maybe a specific domain, maybe even a specific kind of topic set within a domain. It's entirely up to you, depending on what you need to use it for at that particular moment in time. But yes, the idea is that you kind of go through either one pillar, one domain, all of the domains, or just very small specific parts. Self-assess, so kind of rate yourself where you think you fall for each question. And then you can kind of review it from there and have a think about, okay, what do I want to work on? Having gone through the framework, what are my CPD goals now? And how am I going to get to the next level or the next kind of rating scale? And if I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm going to live demo now. This is always fraught with danger. But let's see how we do. So I'm looking at Vicky and Jess as I can see your faces. Can you see my screen? Awesome, thank you kindly. So like I said, if you scanned that QR code earlier, it would have brought you to this page. But this is how you get to the framework. So it is open access, so you don't have to be logged in to get to it. I just am logged in at the moment. But from the RCSLT main page, if you just select the learning and your career section, and then the professional development framework is that top option there, where my mouse is kind of hovering, or was hovering, there we go. And like I said, that'll bring you to this page. You can then access the, I guess the offline version, if you like, of the framework using this link here. It will just download a PDF file for you. And you can also access the interactive version, which, like I said, is what I'm going to. Oh no, I can't access my. Oh, that's upsetting. You can then access the interactive version from here as well. That third button there. And when you click on it, it will bring you to this. And like I said, this is the interactive version. And there's just some instructions on how to use it here as well. I won't go through those right now. And then you can access whichever sections you want. So if you want to do the full framework, you are more than welcome to, but like I said, there's no expectation that each and every time you access it, you will do the whole thing. But you can access that one from here. Or if you want a specific domain, so if you just want to focus on the professional practice one, you can access that here. It is, like I said, entirely up to you and what you're looking for from your development. But if I hop into one, wait for it to load, always a fun pause. And this is what it looks like. And you, like I said, each overall pillar then has a specific sub-theme, which is kind of listed up here. So this is supervision and coaching. And then it goes into the specific topic questions. And for each of them, you just rate yourself where you think you fall. I won't steal my colleague Will's thunder by going through the ratings in any great detail, but a description of what each rating means can be accessed from the slide. And there is also a not applicable now option if it's not something you either are focusing on or even want to focus on at this moment in time. But you just go through, rate yourself. And then at the end of each kind of subsection, you'll get a pie chart of your results. So if all you were doing was one specific section, you could end here, you could screenshot this so you've got kind of a record of how you scored yourself if you intend to come back later and reassess. Or you can keep going. I now can't access them because the bar's in the way. But if you go through a whole section, so a whole kind of pillar, you will also get a bar chart, which you can print if you'd like to. And also every single pie chart from each subsection will be available for you, again, if you want to print it or screenshot it, just as a record. And there is, of course, a text format if that's easier for people. But yeah, it just allows you to kind of have a record of how you scored yourself. The idea being that maybe further on down the line, you might come back, redo this section and see where you've improved, where you've made improvements, and maybe where you still want to make more improvements. But that's how the interactive version works. I can see a few things coming up in chat, but I will get to those, I promise. In terms of supporting resources, and I would imagine Jess is busily hammering links into chat, but there are some interactive scenarios as well, which are linked to each of the pillars. So for argument's sake, you've identified that you'd like to focus on the facilitation of learning pillar in a bit more depth, you can access the interactive scenarios. Wait for them to open. And you can then access specific scenarios that are linked to that particular pillar and then sub-theme. So if you want to focus on the self-awareness and self-development, there are scenarios available for that. You just click the launch button and they'll open up. They're kind of set out as a sort of more of a scenario for you to think about, to reflect on. You can do them either individually on your own or in a group, either works. And yeah, just kind of use them to help you develop. I've navigated away from the website now, that's upsetting. In terms of other kind of professional development framework specific resources, there's a kind of further breakdown of the domains of practice and also the 5 core components from the framework page. And then of course on our website, we've got things like the clinical guidance, professional guidance. We also have a whole host of research and evidence, which you can access if you are more looking for some articles or research, something like that. So there's plenty of resources to help out. But I think I will leave it there for now, and I believe I'm passing back to Vicky. And Hannah, if you want to wrest control of the screen back from me. And like I said, if anyone's got any questions or anything, do pop something in chat, or if it's a specific question, pop it in the Q&A and I will get to it. If not during this session, then like Vicky said, there'll be an FAQs document. And thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. That's a very good walkthrough. And I should say as well, so Jess is on hand if you've got any questions relating to research and outcomes. And we also have some great links around leadership as well. So the leadership and management pillar, so that I'll share those in the chat. And any other areas that you might be interested in that relate to this, please do put some questions in the Q&A, or if you have great resources to share that relate to this, please put them in the chat, and we'll sort of keep an eye on that. Thanks. Okay, I'm going to pass over to Will now. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky and Mark. And hi, I hope everyone's having a good day so far. So now we're going to just go into a bit more detail about the framework at different career stages. So as you can see here, and you've probably seen before on the one side, the image that we have in the professional development framework demonstrating the different career stages and different levels that you may be at. And on the left as well, there's an NHS England image, which is quite nice. It's not directly relatable to or directly relevant in every single aspect, but it shows quite a nice career pathway if you would like to choose this career pathway. In general, there's no right or wrong way to use the framework. It's purposely designed to be flexible so it can fit your CPD needs and also enable you to focus on the different areas that you'd like to work on and develop in. It is a very broad model, and it respects that everyone's unique. People are not expected to be the same rating for every single scale. In fact, it would be quite unusual because of the varying work areas that SLTs work in. You're unlikely to be exactly the same in every single stage of your career. And so from my next slide, please. So the first stage of the professional development framework is the foundation. So it says here that I am informed, but in a way, maybe this slightly underplays the achievement that you've reached at this level, because you're also expected to apply and critically analyze. You're expected to make decisions within protocols that are available to you at this stage, and you're expected to manage rapidly changing events within specific situations. So not in every situation, but in specific ones. So traditionally, this may have been sort of NQP preceptorship level, but it may also be someone who's returned to practice or who works in a different clinical area. So for example, someone who may have worked in, let's say, people who support SPAMA for many years, you may have particularly high competencies in the communication section of the professional development framework, but it may be lower in, let's say, eating, drinking, and swallowing, because it's what's relevant to you and your career and where you're at. Next slide, please. So the next level, proficient. This is where you identify as being knowledgeable and skilled. So here you'd be expected to apply and critically analyze. You'd be expected to use reasoning to justify deviating away from protocols when appropriate, and also able to manage a range of situations in different contexts. So once again, this is probably past NQP preceptorship level, and you maybe start this around 18 months to 2 years after completing that. As with previous ratings, this could also just be an area that you've had no experience in before, because once again, the varied areas that SLTs do work in. So you're likely to be ticking this off, saying that you reached this level, primarily through experience, but also potentially CPD opportunities. So that could be different to clinical responsibilities, and you may have progressed particularly in, say, teaching and mentoring, because that was a particular interest of yours. So you might have higher on teaching and mentoring, and lower even on the clinical aspects of the competencies. And it's completely up to you which areas you choose to work on, and then what area you might feel you are proficient in. So next slide, please. So the next stage is enhanced. So here you'd be expected to have enhanced knowledge and skills. And through this, you'd be expected to critically evaluate and create, manage risk and function in an unpredictable environment, make complex decisions, but you wouldn't be expected to make all decisions. If there is something particularly complicated or particularly major decision to make, you'd seek guidance for this as well. You're not expected to do everything at this stage. So in general, you probably gained experience gained experience providing enhanced knowledge and skills. So this would also provide exposure to working in multidisciplinary teams and understanding how systems work within the organisation that you work for. Someone at this stage is also more likely to manage a discrete element of patient's care rather than the whole pathway. So here onwards, there's also the expectation to be working towards all 4 pillars of practice. So that's clinical, research, leadership, and education. So in general, the ratings are probably more consistent overall, but you would still have a great variation when you zoom in within each area of the competencies. So to reach this level enhanced, it is relatively new, so we're not going to go into too much detail about it now, and we can zoom in on this at another time or later on in this presentation as well. But it would be by completing an enhanced practice apprenticeship. This is a profession-specific course, but as I say, focused on all 4 pillars of practice, and it just helps prepare the clinician for the next stage of their career, whilst improving the patient pathway and also getting a better understanding of the local population needs. So next slide, please. So the next stage is advanced, and as you can see, once again, this is where you'd say you have advanced knowledge and skills. So you'd be able to critically evaluate and create, manage extensive risk in unpredictable environments, and also make more decisions that involve high level of complexity and risk. So once again, here, you wouldn't just go straight into advanced. As you'll see at the beginning, the NHS England example, it's the next stage after enhanced. So you'd probably be saying around 5 years after completing or working at an enhanced level, you might be able to say, you might identify as advanced in certain levels. To be an advanced, you'd be expected to be a leader, educator, or highly skilled. And it may not be advanced in every single aspect as well. It might be that you've got a particular focus on one area. But also to be advanced, you'd have a better understanding and a wider understanding of the wider healthcare system and how this impacts practice. So as I said, similarly, it goes across all 4 pillars of practice, but we may not be advanced in all. SLTs work in over 30 clinical areas, so it'd be almost impossible to be advanced in every single area. It's just too varied. So to reach this level, if you would choose to go for an advanced role, it could be reached by completing an ACPA apprenticeship, a master's, or even completing the e-portfolio route that's available now. This does vary slightly from nation to nation, but in general, the expectation is you'd probably have an MSc or be doing a level 7 apprenticeship to reach this level. So next slide, please. So the next stage is expert, and this is where you identify some expertise. So you'll be able to critically evaluate and create, manage extensive risk across the system, and also make decisions that once again involve a high level of complexity and risk. So in some situations, you might compare expert to a consultant level of practice, but this may not be in all areas. You may only identify yourself as an expert in one area. This is, you may have done more CPD in one area. So let's say leadership, for example, you might have done multiple CPD opportunities in leadership. So you feel like you've reached that sort of expertise, that expert level in there. But at the same time, you may not have engaged in research at all. So it may even be that you're proficient or foundation in research. It doesn't mean you're the same at every single level. So to be a consultant, once again, or expert, you've got that sort of leadership, you're an enabler, a facilitator, and your focus is more on about enabling system-wide culture of learning as well at this level. Once again, that won't be in every single section, depending on what you've reached, but if you were to tick yourself off as an expert in most levels, that's the sort of thing we'd be expecting. Next slide, please. I can also see questions coming in. I will come to those, I promise. I'm just going to finish these slides first, and then I'll come back and look at those in a bit more detail. So the final stage is not applicable now. So Mark did mention this briefly earlier on, and this could be just because it's not an area that's relevant to you. And as we've talked for a couple of examples earlier, you might be particularly focused on one clinical area or one aspect of the 4 pillars. So you may not be zooming in on everything. For example, if you're in your early stage of your career, teaching and mentoring may not be as much of a priority for you, but you might have really sort of progressed in other areas, and you shouldn't stop yourself from saying that you're an expert or you're advanced in certain levels if you don't, and then because other levels you don't think it's applicable to you. So once again, it might be in one section of the competencies that you have some aspects that are expert, some aspects are not applicable to you, and some aspects may be proficient, but it does give that sort of general guidance. The next slide, please. So as you may know, RCSLT is committed to developing opportunities and involving roles in post-registration education and learning. And NHS England have recently provided a sum of funding to go on to sort of looking at supporting ongoing education reform priorities for allied health professionals. Obviously, this has come from NHS England, but we are not an England-centric organisation with the Royal College of Speech Language Therapy, and we do work for all 4 nations without any bias. So our focus will be on developing opportunities for each nation and not just England. Other bits we're about to do is go out to tender for an enhanced practice apprenticeship. So I did mention this earlier on. Currently, there is no enhanced practice apprenticeship for SLTs, but we are looking at developing this as we speak with this new batch of money as well, which will create those opportunities and really help you solidify each level of the professional development framework as well. We've also recently gone out and engaged with RCOT, so the Royal College of Occupational Therapy, to re-image and develop opportunities in advancing practice, specifically in community settings. We're wary that advancing practice has been typically more focused on sort of the medical model, which, as we know, 6% of SLTs work in sort of children settings, children and young people settings, or in the community settings. So the current courses aren't always aligned to the work that certainly SLTs do, but also people like occupational therapists. So joining together, trying to create a more unified front and resemble and reflect for all allied health professionals also working in community settings, not just the medical model. To zoom in on this further, we're going to have another webinar in the autumn, and we'll also be hosting a podcast as well, just to provide a bit more information about what we're doing, where we're going, and the direction of travel with all evolving roles. So yeah, I'll come to questions next. If you have any, please do pop them in there and I'll go through them as fast as I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. That was a really great walkthrough of the levels, and sort of to just to reiterate the fact that obviously, as both Mark and Will said, that there is that sort of line of walking through that you saw from the first slide, the image from NHSE, that sort of progression, but to reiterate that everyone's different, and so you'll be at different levels at different stages of your career, and no one person will have the same profile as another. Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to pass it over to Kirsty. Thank you, Kirsty.
Hi, thanks, and thanks for inviting me along to speak today, the interloper from outside RCSLT, and actually outside of the profession just now, as I'm currently working in a secondment role for all EHPs in an advancing practice role. I'm based in NHS Lothian, which is southeast of Scotland, Edinburgh, and the wider region, and I'm delighted to speak today on, I suppose, my take on the professional development framework and how it aligns to advanced practice. Next slide, please. I think it's probably relevant to start with a sort of definition around advanced practice, and I know that there's maybe some slight differences across the 4 nations, and I have got slides to reflect that, but essentially there are certain themes that are common when we're describing advanced practice. Certainly it relates to registered and experienced professionals, and we've already made that point that it's an experienced professional at the level of advanced practice. And also there's this link to autonomous practice. Now, as we come into the profession from point of entry, we are autonomous practitioners. However, people or practitioners working at that advanced level are expected to work with associated level of complexity and also risk, and hold accountability for the decisions that they make. To support this, there is an expectation that postgraduate education will have been completed, possibly to master's level, or the ability to evidence this equivalency via a portfolio piece. Another common theme, which we've already alluded to this morning, is the 4 pillars of practice. So the clinical pillar, leadership and management, education and research, facilitation of learning, and associated with the pillars is this demonstration of core capabilities or knowledge, skills and behaviours, but also the potential to highlight the role-specific competencies that are relevant to your particular role. So just to summarise, this definition comes from the HEE Multi-Professional Framework for Advanced Clinical Practice. Healthcare professionals working at advanced practice have autonomy and decision-making in a context of complexity, uncertainty, and varying levels of risk, and they hold accountability for the decisions they make. Next slide, please. Scotland haven't actually got a nationally agreed definition for advanced practice for AHPs. They do, however, have an NMAP post-registration development framework, which actually walks through levels of practice from healthcare support workers to level 8, which is noted as consultant level. Advanced practice sits at level 7, and as you can see from the slide, maps to the themes that we've already discussed. So registered postgraduate qualifications, operating at thinking or working at master's level, the 4 pillars of practice, changing environments, complexity, etc. Next slide, please. Also, Northern Ireland have created the Advanced HP Practice Framework, which also maps quite nicely to the definitions that I've already gone through. Next slide, please. And similarly, a professional framework for enhanced, advanced and consultant clinical practice has also been developed and devised in Wales. Next slide, please. So in terms of thinking about why a career framework is important, essentially it's developing and progressing through the career and the potential to move through levels of practice, but also the know-how. So shaping the development for people and making it quite clear as to how you can move through levels, what's required at the next stage, and what support and education and training you may be required to undertake in order to reach the next level. There's also the potential to shift focus from roles across sort of clinical pillars, management, and also leadership roles. I think previously it's fair to say that in order to develop through your career, really the development came through moving into a managerial role. And actually this balance has massively shifted in more recent years. So people are able to develop their career by focusing very much on a clinical area or potentially in a research and development area. By working across the 4 pillars of practice and developing skills in each different area, hopefully that should develop and improve job satisfaction, because you're actually learning and developing in different ways. And so you're not just focusing on one area. And actually, speaking from personal experience, when I first took my job, so my substantive clinical post is actually in head and neck oncology and ENT, and I took on my role in 2006. And my role was newly mapped to the Agenda for Change profile not long after I started, and it was mapped to a consultant profile, which actually talked through the 4 pillars of practice. And this was quite a significant time ago. So I've always had a sort of particular special interest in developing across the different pillars of practice. And initially when I started, I was very much focusing on that clinical area, so developing my clinical skills, knowledge base, so courses were related to the clinical role. But as time has gone on and I've spent the 20 years in my role, I've actually been able to move through the pillars of practice and more latterly been much more involved in research, publications, putting through an IRAS proposal and getting a research proposal through. So that's something that I've moved through as I've progressed in my career. And certainly there's a balancing act to be had in terms of the pillars of practice or domains of practice, as we will go on to talk about. There's not necessarily the expectation that you're always maxing out in every pillar. It may be that as your career develops, you focus a little bit more attention on one pillar or a couple of pillars rather than the other. But hopefully over your career, you've got the ability to evidence that you actually have got the knowledge and skills across the 4 areas. Next slide, please. So in terms of the RCSLT professional framework and how it aligns, I think, with advanced practice, well, certainly in terms of the professional practice domain, there's certainly recognition for the autonomy and accountability that was discussed as part of the definition. There are core capabilities that link to autonomy and accountability and the ability for you to self-assess or map yourself to that advanced or expert level. And the other thing I like about the core capabilities is it's the potential to bring evidence as well to support the roles that you're doing, and we'll talk about that a little bit in more detail. The framework also talks about the development levels, as Will's already gone on, has already described, and that scope of practice is very much from foundation through to expert level. So there's certainly is the potential for speech and language therapists to be working at an advanced or expert level. Also, in terms of the definition and the knowledge and skills and behaviours that are associated with advanced level, there's a nod to that risk and unpredictable environment, and also the decisions which involve high complexity. Next slide, please. So yes, RCSLT have moved away from using the term pillar, have used the domains of practice, but essentially maps very nicely or aligned very nicely to the pillars of practice. So we've got professional practice, so that's the sort of the more the aspect of your role that you're carrying out. And what's very nice about the RCSLT development framework is that it's specific to speech and language. So some of the other more national frameworks that I've alluded to are much more generic across EHPs, but this particular piece of work focuses very much into our own profession. Facilitation of learning is there, leadership and management, and evidence, research and innovation. So everything's there with the lovely sub-themes as well. So it's very detailed and a really good piece of work for us to be able to showcase how we move across the domains of practice. Next slide, please. There's a lot of detail in the framework across the domains of practice, and I've just highlighted the flavour of these on the slide. But you can see there that the sort of knowledge and skills and behaviours, or the core capabilities under these domains of practice, are actually outlined in great detail. There's potential for you to self-assess, but there's also the potential for you to use these as evidence for your ability to justify your level of practice in a particular role. And this could be used as part of your appraisal process. So yes, I think there's a great ability to highlight and self-assess, but I actually think we should be starting to think around how we start bringing the evidence to our appraisal process. So the core capabilities are identified, but also there's also an identification of that sort of role-specific competencies. So also thinking about the particular nuances of the role that you're being asked to do, and any frameworks that maybe you could use or develop that would support the actual role that you're being asked to do in more detail. Next slide, please. As part of my role just now working across HPs, certainly the governance and assurance aspect is a key component of that. And so I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that the framework actually does speak to governance and assurance, I think, from an RCSLT perspective. Certainly within the facilitation of learning domain, there's core capabilities that map to leadership. So good leadership, how to offer leadership to others, how to develop your leadership skills so that you can influence strategically. And I think that's important, that people on the ground that are carrying out these advanced roles have the ability to actually influence and create change. The core capabilities across the domains create a fantastic training and learning and development opportunity. So with the self-assessment, you've got the ability to highlight development and learning needs in particular domains. Again, not everything needs to be done at the one time, but you can sort of map that across your career and depending on the role you're doing. From a sort of clinical or role aspect, that professional domains, so the professional practice domain actually has a lot of detail for you to be able to evidence your knowledge and skills and behaviours within that particular domain, and bring that as part of your appraisal process. Supervision is mapped to the facilitation of learning. So again, there's a good understanding of what supervision you should be accessing in your role, how you might deliver supervision, how you can develop your role as a supervisor. Again, is very important, very critical to the governance and assurance of advanced roles. Because of the way the development framework is set out, there's certainly that potential for continued professional development. There's certainly areas for growth and for you to identify your learning needs. So CPD is well covered in the RCSLT professional development framework. And I think finally, from a workforce perspective, it's a really nice way of starting to clearly articulate what's expected at different levels, so that when it comes to mapping a workforce and deciding what levels required for different roles, again, the professional development framework can be utilised for that, with the expectations of what will align to that role. And that should help with writing job descriptions. It should help with identifying training that's required to go with these roles. And clearly the governance assurance aspect is around safeguarding, protecting the people that are accessing the services, but also making sure that the people in these roles have the necessary education, experience and training to be doing the roles that they're being asked to do. Next slide, please. So finally, just a few thoughts from my perspective. I think it would be really nice if we started to bring some live examples, so seeing how people had actually mapped themselves to the framework and have a range of different roles, so maybe something a bit more specialist versus someone that works in a more general role, and have that sort of adult and paediatric sort of similarities and difference brought to the table as well. So I think it would be really nice to actually see what sort of evidence people are utilising and bringing forward whilst using the framework. I think it'd be nice to see what people are using for the role specific aspect. So now we've got that nice core capabilities, but I think actually we need to start to look at what are the more role specific stuff, depending on your role. So what is required, because that really helps to shape the training, you know, and if you left your role, what would be expected from somebody else coming in and how can they support that? It would be nice to see the framework as part of a portfolio piece, I think. So it'd be nice to see how it could be used for that. And I think there's certainly a separate governance framework for AP roles, but it'd be good to draw in some of the work that's certainly here in the professional framework that's already available to us. Thank you, that's me finished, and thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Kirsty. That's a really thorough walkthrough, and also I really like the ideas for sort of future, how we might take this in the future. So we're making notes. Okay, thank you. So thank you to all the speakers. Now we have a bit of time for Q&A, and I can see that there are lots of questions that have come in. We also have some pre-registration questions. I can be honest, we're not going to get through all of them, but as I said, we will be sharing an FAQs document. So if we don't get to yours, rest assured you will get an answer. So I'm just going to go with the opening the live questions for now and just start at the top, I think. And colleagues who are at the panel, please jump in as well. But the first question we've got is from Laura, who says, what support and development opportunities are there if you're not employed by the NHS? And I have just been making some notes, so if I can start on this and then open it up to colleagues. I think that's a really good question to think about. What I would suggest is that RCSLT does provide a lot of resources and events and so forth. So the best thing to do would be to make sure that you're signed up to our e-newsletter, which comes out every 2 weeks with all of these kind of opportunities, and look on the website as well. But, you know, some of the opportunities you might take to develop your skills are perhaps to join a SEN or a hub to develop those skills. If you're interested in research, you might want to become a research champion. And I wonder if I can ask Jess to put details about that in the chat, please. But there are loads of resources on the RCSLT website. There's some leadership and influeing e-learning. Look out also for RCSLT conferences and study days and face-to-face events. We're looking at how we might provide more in the leadership area at the moment, so watch out for that. But there are opportunities to get involved with projects, with curriculum guidance, with the NQP. We're looking at NQP goals this year, so those are big things coming up if you want to get involved in that. Getting involved in developing our e-learning, being on a webinar like Kirsty today, being part of a podcast. So those are all RCSLT things. And then don't forget that there are the other opportunities that you get from life, such as being a mentor or being menteed, supervisor or supervisee, shadowing opportunities, just trying new things. Don't be afraid to just jump in just outside your sort of comfort zone, and that's where there'll be a lot of growth. So just sort of keep an open mind and look at all those opportunities. So that's what I'd say. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in on that with any particulars. No? Okay. Thank you, Laura. That's a really good question. An anonymous attendee has said, why only link with RCOT? And that's for the work we're doing. In some community or inpatient settings, SLTs are more akin to clinical psychology rather than OT. Will, you said you'd like to answer this? Yeah,
absolutely. It's a really good question. Ultimately, the main reason we've linked up with RCOT is because we reached out to different allied health professionals, and RCOT reached out to us as well. And we seem to be the only two who are particularly focused on this in this moment. So the reason we're able to do this work currently with RCOT is because of the funding from NHS England. And unfortunately, the clinical psychology isn't an allied health professional, so they haven't received the same funding for the workforce reform. We do recognise that clinical psychology is aligned with speech and language therapy completely, and it's definitely worth having conversations with them to understand how they've done things and what they've done. But as I say, unfortunately, this is from NHS England for the funding for allied health professionals, so that's why we've linked up with them. They asked us, we asked them, and none of the other professional bodies, unfortunately, were interested in doing the same work as us at this stage. But no, thank you for your question. It's definitely something that we should be considering, is linking in with clinical psychology and understanding what they've done and how they've reached these areas.
Thank you, Will. Okay, the next question is, where would someone with decades of experience, but maybe not postgraduate qualifications, fall on the ratings? I don't know, Will, you'd like to answer that, but maybe Kirsty, if you add as well.
Yeah, sure. I can go quickly first and then Kirsty can take over. So as I say, this is maybe sort of the way I phrase things. The professional development framework is simply for you and your own reflection of your own learning. It's not zooming in necessarily on the qualifications you should or shouldn't have. It's how you feel that you rate on the professional development framework for your own career. But absolutely, even if you've had decades of experience, there's no doubt that you've got advanced skills and expert skills in those sections. So please do put yourself at that scale. It's what feels right to you, and please don't feel obliged to adhere to any other sort of professional bodies or any other guidance, for example, NHS England, because these are separate. It's not a framework for all allied health professionals. It's a framework for speech and language therapists, and it's a framework for yourself. So it's whatever feels right for you.
Yes, thanks. Well, I would echo that. And I think the nice thing about the framework is that it allows you to bring evidence from your experience as a practicing clinician, and that that sort of master's qualification is potentially part of that, but certainly not the whole picture. And so you can actually draw upon your experience as a practitioner, and then draw the evidence from your actual experience across your career and the different areas. And it's actually a really nice way of using your experience to showcase how you have developed.
Right, thank you, Will and Kirsty. Okay, Debbie has come in with a question. Would you be expected to have wider understanding of education if that's the setting you work in, rather than just healthcare settings for at the advanced stage? And also important to ensure independent practitioners feel this is for them and not NHS centric. Yes, I think you would. I mean, if you were working in an education setting, I would imagine you would score yourself quite highly in that area, unless you'd only just joined and you'd come from somewhere else. So I think by being in that position, you'll necessarily get those skills. So to go back to what Polly's saying, it really is about your profile, where you've come from, and where you are at a particular stage. So if you've been working in education for a long time, I'd expect you to be doing very well in that area. But if you'd only just moved into it, it probably, you'd need, you'd see that you progress from a lower level. So I hope that answers that. And of course, as we said, this is not just NHS centric, this is for everyone. And indeed, we went to the, Mark and I went to the RCSLT, the Independent Practitioners membership group, about a month ago to share the professional development framework with them, because it's really important. Okay, thank you.
Could I just quickly add something there? Sorry, Vicky, very quickly. Sorry, once again, that's my wording. I should have thought about that better, probably, in all honesty. I would say, for example, if you're looking at wider healthcare settings, it's probably the wrong terminology to use, especially as I've just been talking about how we're trying to move away from always having to focus on healthcare settings and hospital settings. So, for example, in education, it might be having a wider understanding of the educational settings, which may include things like social services and so on as well.
That's a very good point. Thank you, Will. Next question is from Mark. How can we compare responses across time or identify specific areas to work on, as the tool doesn't save your responses?
Thank you for that question, first of all. It's a very good question. And I think I'm going to try and be as brief as possible in my answer, but there are kind of several factors that fed into this. First of all, a lot of the feedback we got in the early stages of development, certainly of the interactive version, was that people didn't want their answers to be saved, because that then begs the question, where is it saved? Who has access to it? And it's a very personal thing. You share the results with whoever you want, obviously, but until such time as you decide to do that, no one can access your results except you. And that we felt that was quite important. In terms of how you can compare responses across time, if you're using the, I guess, the offline version, so the PDF version, you can either keep a printout of that or, kind of save a different version each time and compare that way. And with the interactive version, there are the options to print or save as a PDF when you've kind of completed whole sections, but also if you just want to do a couple of smaller bits, you can screenshot the little pie chart thing. And as long as you keep that screenshot somewhere in a folder on your desktop or wherever you happen to store your CPD stuff, you can then kind of compare it across time that way. I hope that answers it. Do feel free to ask a follow-up question if you'd like, or reach out afterwards if you'd like to, and we can discuss it further. But yeah, I hope that answers it.
Thank you, Mark. Before I look at some of these questions that come live, I'm aware of the time, and I just wanted, there was a pre-registration question, which, sorry, pre-registration as in registration for the webinar, that came in that talks more about someone in the early stages of their career. So we've been talking a lot about advanced practice. Just want to balance it up a bit. So someone asked, how can the framework be utilised for developing graduate capital and agency in their employability journey? I thought that was an amazing question and something we hadn't really considered before. So yeah, I had a little think about this, and it is so it's a great tool for wherever you're at in your journey to map yourselves into, so you can see what skills you have and where you might want to develop. And I think for graduates, I mean, we certainly in the speech and language therapy have loads of people who are doing their speech and language therapy as a second degree. So they may already have an existing degree in a particular area. So, like linguistics and psychology are quite common. Or they may have come from another career entirely, like the police, for example, or teaching. So that you may actually have quite a high profile in some of the areas when you map yourselves in. So I think it really gives you an understanding of where you are and what the previous you brings to this role. And so I think it helps people to understand their worth and possibly be more proactive in seeking opportunities. And that's great for discussion with employers and also with supervisors and mentors. So I don't know if anyone wants to add to that, but those are my reflections. To a great question. Thank you. Okay. Next question live is, have I understood this correctly? I cannot say I have advanced practice without a master's or equivalent qualification. I'm going to go to Will and Kirsty for this one.
Yeah, so absolutely. The professional development framework, where you mark your competencies, is completely up to you, and it's reflective of your beliefs of what you've done and where you're at. There's absolutely no obligations to have done any sort of CPD to identify as even expert on that. It might be that you feel like you're born as a natural leader, and you might match on those competencies without doing any CPD. So you might automatically say you've got expertise in those areas because that's just you. That's just your skills as a person and who you are as a person. So absolutely not for the professional development framework. It's where you think you're at and what you feel like, and it enables you to identify areas that you'd like to develop on. If we're talking in services or in the actual workplace, there are differences, and there's difference between services, different between nations. When we're looking at sort of advancing consultant practice, it isn't consistent, and some services may suggest that you should have sort of post-registration educational learning there. Some services will say they can demonstrate your experience and see that you are an extremely sort of advanced practitioner or you are an expert practitioner, and would be more than happy to say you can go into this role with those set skills that you develop throughout your experiences.
Thanks, Will. Kirsty, did you want to add anything to that?
I don't think so. I think that encapsulates it nicely. The definitions were there from the Four Nations, but yeah, in terms of actually and sort of enforcing education qualifications, I think it is very different around the Four Nations and also different within trusts, within professions. And again, just reinforcing that the professional framework allows you to really sort of think about, self-assess to the different domains and how you can sort of bring your own evidence from your own professional career that might involve some education that you've done, other education modules, but that won't necessarily be the full picture. There'll be so much other stuff that you can draw from the roles that you've been doing throughout your career.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kirsty. I'm going to try and squeeze in one more question before we close. So there's a great question. Tips for having these conversations with managers. It opens up conversations around changes in team structures potentially, and therefore funding. Yeah, so I appreciate that's a difficult one. I might go to Kirsty for this if I can see what you would say in out in the real world.
Yeah, I think one of the tools that we've used quite a lot in the role that I'm doing just now is around sort of service needs analysis, which really gets you to consider, I suppose, the service in a wider sense, but also in a narrower sense. So thinking what population you're serving, what you are asking a particular role to do, whether that might be in a management area, whether it might be in a more professional area, whether it might be in a research area, what support there is for that particular role, and that might be out with the profession, it might be within the profession, and what training and education is required to sit alongside the role. So I think in terms of from a workforce perspective, it's really nice to have the different levels articulated so that you could see where roles may sit within a workforce and what might sit above and what might sit below, and what support supervision and training and education you need to put into place. So it starts to really look at the roles in a much wider lens to make sure that I suppose it meets the needs of the population it's going to serve.
It's wonderful, wonderfully put. Thank you. Okay, now I think we probably need to close because I just need to remind you that we need to, well, we would like you to fill in our evaluation survey, please, so we can ensure that we keep improving with the delivery of these and make sure it is relevant to you. So if you could just scan that QR code, please, you'll get access to the survey, and we'll just give you a few minutes. While you're doing that, I want to thank everyone for their for attending today. It was a really rich discussion, so thank you for the questions. Thank you also to the panelists for raising some great points and for your time. And it's been really good. And I'm just going to give you a few minutes before we close so you can do the QR code. I should also give you the date for the next webinar, actually, which I believe is, I'm not going to say it until I've looked at it. I think it's in May. And I'm just checking now. And it was what I thought it was. 22nd of May at 12 p.m. as our final webinar in this series. And we're using the framework at that stage to think about the career journey more broadly. So think about a growth career, think about the relationship between expertise and specialism and where you sit, and consider the nature of career progression and development, and think about your own journey. So it'd be great if you could join us for that. Okay, well, I think we're going to draw it to a close now. Thank you everyone for your time, and hope to see you again at the next webinar. Thank you. Goodbye.